Deep-sea exploration is incredibly dangerous, from disasters like the HMS Thetis back in 1939 all the way to the Oceangate Titan submersible in 2023. Today we take a deep dive into some of the most deadly and disturbing deep-sea expeditions of all time. The USS Thresher. This was a US Navy attack submarine that sank on April 10th, 1963. The sub was cutting edge for the time, the latest in submarine technology. But during a deep-sea dive test off the coast of Massachusetts, something went very wrong. Several garbled messages were received on the surface, and then nothing. So a search and rescue mission was launched, but nothing turned up. The sub wasn't discovered until 1964, torn to pieces on the sea floor. What's believed to have happened was that a pipe or a weld in the engine room failed, causing water to flood in. And when this happened, the submarine's reactor shut down, leaving it without power to move. The crew tried to use the ballast tanks to float back up, but the air system was toast. Moisture in the system turned into ice and blocked the valves, so the submarine couldn't rise, and with no way to stop it, the Thresher just kept sinking. The deeper it went, the more pressure it faced until the hull finally would have given in. It was crushed by the intense pressure, and all 129 people on board were killed instantly. La Minerve. For decades, this was probably the most mysterious submarine disaster in history. Everyone knew something bad had happened, obviously, but no one knew where the sub actually was. La Minerve was a French submarine that mysteriously vanished in 1968. In fact, it's one of 4 subs that went missing that year. The sub had been on a routine training mission in the Mediterranean Sea when it suddenly disappeared without a trace. A search and rescue was launched, with ships and aircraft scouring the sea for any sign of the missing sub, but they found nothing. And for decades, the fate of the submarine was a complete mystery. Families of the crew members were left in limbo, never knowing what happened to their loved ones. It wasn't until 2019, more than 50 years after it disappeared, that the sub was finally found by a company called Ocean Infinity. It was lying on the seabed about 45 kilometers off the coast of France. So what exactly caused the submarine to sink? It looked like there had been a catastrophic implosion, but the exact cause is still a mystery, and we'll likely never know. Another one of the mysterious submarine disappearances in 1968 was the USS Scorpion. The Scorpion was a US Navy submarine. It was on a routine patrol in the Atlantic Ocean when it suddenly disappeared. There was no distress call, no warning whatsoever. All that was known was that the captain had said they were closing in on a Soviet sub. It wasn't until several months later that wreckage from the Scorpion was found on the ocean floor, but the discovery raised more questions than answers. What caused the Scorpion to sink? Why did it happen so suddenly without any warning signs? Some think there could have been mechanical failure, but this was the Cold War, so most people think it had something to do with that. Next up, we have the HMS Thetis. On June 1st, 1939, the submarine was on a trial run in Liverpool Bay. Part of the trial was, of course, a test dive. Now, a lot went wrong here. First of all, the sub was packed. There were 103 men on board, double the amount that the vessel had been designed for. Most were sailors, but there were also engineers from the company that built the sub. The Thetis tried to dive, but it wasn't able to. It was too light. Lieutenant Frederick Woods, not knowing that the torpedo tubes were already full of water, let more in to try and make the vessel heavier, but there was a problem. A painter had accidentally blocked a crucial valve with enamel, making it seem safe to open the inner torpedo door. This caused a rush of water into the sub, sending it nose first to the seabed. It took hours for the SOS alarm to reach the Navy, and when they finally did arrive, things just got worse. They tried to lift the vessel, but the wire snapped and the sub sank once again. In the end, there were only 4 survivors. 99 men were still trapped inside. It wasn't until 4 months later that the submarine was raised and the bodies were recovered. Next up, we have the Ming 361 disaster. The Ming 361 submarine was on a mission. part of China's strategy to secure its maritime borders against the US Pacific Fleet. It was stationed in the Yellow Sea off China's northeast coast. It was primed for exercises, but things didn't go as planned. During a routine maneuver in April of 2003, disaster struck as the submarine's diesel engine malfunctioned, a glitch which quickly turned deadly. The engine's failure led to a carbon monoxide nightmare, sucking the oxygen out of the cramped vessel. The vessel did surface, but was basically a tomb. It drifted for 10 days before Chinese fishermen came across the vessel on April 25th. The entire crew was found slumped over their stations. The Kursk was the pride of the Russian Navy until a tragic incident in 2000. On August 12th of that year, during a naval exercise in the Barents Sea, the Kursk, a nuclear-powered Oscar second-class submarine, was out to prove its might, armed to the teeth with torpedoes, but little did anyone know this would be its final journey. At 7:29 a.m., a seismic jolt, 1.5 on the Richter scale, was detected. 2 minutes and 14 seconds later, a massive quake, 250 times stronger, sent shockwaves across northern Europe. Nobody knew it at the time, but the Kursk had met its fate. For 12 hours, the Russian Navy danced around the disaster, pretending all was well. In reality, though, the Kursk was laying on the seabed, its crew fighting this losing battle for survival. Rescue attempts were made, but all had failed, and finally the truth came out. There had been a catastrophic torpedo explosion. There were no survivors. Next up, we have the Russian submarine, the Losharik. Unlike other submarines, the Losharik wasn't a traditional vessel with a long hull. Instead, it was a special kind of submersible designed for deep-sea research and rescue. With its nuclear-powered engines and titanium spheres, it was a marvel of engineering. Apparently, I don't really know what titanium spheres are, but that's just what I read. During one of its missions in the Arctic Ocean in 2019, something went terribly wrong. There was a fire on board, 250 miles north of the Arctic Circle. The crew found themselves in a desperate situation. Submarines are already tight spaces, so as much as they tried to contain the fire, it just quickly spread. Now, fortunately, unlike the Kursk, the submarine was salvaged, and not everyone died here. Some were rescued, but the toll was heavy. 14 crew members died in the fire, including high-ranking officers and captains of other submarines. As for how the fire started, we don't really know. There aren't a lot of details, at least not publicly available. The Russian government didn't provide a whole lot of information about the incident. Next up, we once again have another Russian sub. On April 7th, 1989, the Soviets' K-8 embarked on its maiden voyage in the Barents Sea, but it would never return. It's still sitting at the bottom of the sea to this very day. A short circuit in the engine room sparked a fire, forcing the submarine to surface. Unfortunately, some of the crew died in the fire, and many did manage to escape, but at least half of them died in the icy waters. As flames consumed the vessel, it sank to the ocean floor. Expeditions in the mid-90s revealed that the K-8 was a radioactive nightmare, too. Its hull was severely damaged, and its nuclear arsenal was a ticking time bomb, and it seems like things have only gotten worse. Sea samples have been taken in recent years with abnormally high radiation levels close to the wreck, 100,000 times more radioactive than normal. The ARA San Juan was an Argentine Navy diesel-electric submarine that vanished without a trace off the coast of Argentina on November 15th of 2017. It was on a routine patrol in the South Atlantic Ocean and was en route to its home port when something went wrong and it suddenly disappeared. For days, there was no sign of the submarine. Search efforts were launched with ships and aircraft from multiple countries. Hopes continued to dwindle, though, as the search and rescue for the 44 people on board eventually became a search just for the missing wreck. Finally, on November 16th, 2018, a year after the sub had gone missing, the San Juan was discovered in the depths of the Atlantic Ocean. The submarine's hull had imploded. imploded. Debris from the sub was found scattered on the ocean floor off the coast of Patagonia. And finally, we of course have the Oceangate Titan submersible. This was a wild news story last year. For those who somehow didn't hear about this at the time or just need a refresher, I will refresh you. Stockton Rush was the CEO and co-founder of Oceangate, a privately owned deep-sea tourism company. The Titan was a submersible which had been used to tour the wreck of the Titanic before. There was a lot of controversy surrounding this thing though. A lot of deep-sea experts looked at the Titan and were like, that is clearly not up to standard, that is a death trap waiting to happen. Well, the Titan's final dive would be on June 18th of 2023. There were 5 men on board: Paul Henry Narjolet, a French deep-sea explorer and Titanic enthusiast, a British billionaire named Hamish Harding, a Pakistani British billionaire and businessman, Shahzada Dawood and his son, and finally Stockton Rush himself. The Titan began its descent and everything seemed pretty routine, but about an hour and 45 minutes into the dive, all contact was lost between the submersible and its support vessel on the surface, and then it didn't surface at all. Days went by as a massive search was launched. There was all this speculation as to what had happened. Was the submersible destroyed? Had they managed to surface but just drifted off somewhere? Time was of the essence, because if they had sunk to the bottom, they'd be quickly running out of air. It was a ticking clock, and finally though, the Titan was found, at least what was left of it. It looked like the small vessel had imploded almost as soon as communication had ceased. The implosion would have taken less than a millisecond. With all of that said, I've been your host, James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.